For 35 years, Ellen and Robert Harper buried the memory of the black baby girl they gave away, as if she never existed. But fate has a way of unearthing secrets. In a twist of destiny, they meet her again under heartbreaking circumstances that will leave you breathless. Who is she now? And what hidden truths will unravel? Stick with us to find out. If this story moves you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who loves a good tale. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And when? What's your guess for how this ends? Let's dive in. The heart monitor's rhythmic beep sliced through the sterile silence of the Atlanta hospital room, each pulse a fragile thread holding Ellen Harper to life. Her face, etched with 65 years of quiet regrets, lay pale against the crisp white pillow. Beside her, Robert clutched her hand, his knuckles whitening as if he could anchor her to this world. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, mirroring the weight in his chest, a weight heavier than the heart failure threatening to steal his wife. 35 years ago, they'd made a choice, and tonight it clawed at him like a ghost refusing to stay buried. "Stay with me, Ellen," he whispered, voice cracking. Her fingers twitched, a faint response, but her eyes remained closed, lost in a haze of pain and sedatives. The room smelled of antiseptic and fear, the kind that seeped into your bones. A young nurse adjusted an IV drip, her movements brisk but careful, as if she sensed the fragility of the moment. Robert's gaze drifted to the window, where the city's skyline glittered, indifferent to the unraveling of their lives. The doctor's words from an hour ago echoed in his mind. "Mrs. Harper's heart is failing. We can stabilize her for now, but without a transplant, her chances are slim." Slim. The word felt like a blade, cutting through the fragile hope Robert had clung to since the ambulance's wail tore through their quiet Georgia night. He'd watched Ellen fade for months, shortness of breath, dizzy spells, but they'd both ignored the signs as if denial could rewrite fate. A memory flickered, unbidden, sharp as broken glass. 35 years ago, under a Georgia sky heavy with rain, Ellen had sobbed in his arms, her body trembling as she signed away their secret. The baby girl, with skin like polished ebony, had been so small, her tiny fist curled against Ellen's chest. They'd named her nothing, fearing a name would make her real, would make the loss unbearable. "It's for her own good," Ellen had whispered, but her eyes screamed otherwise. Robert had nodded, silenced by his family's threats. Disownment, disgrace. They were young, trapped in a town where whispers of mixed blood could ruin lives. The monitor's beep faltered, snapping Robert back. His breath caught as Ellen stirred, her lips parting in a faint moan. "Robert," her voice was a thread, barely audible. "We were wrong. About her." Her words pierced him, each syllable a shard of their shared guilt. He squeezed her hand, desperate to hush her, terrified she'd unravel their secret here, now, in this cold, clinical cage. "Don't talk, love. Save your strength," he urged, glancing at the door. The nurse had left, but the fear of being overheard gnawed at him. Ellen's confession, even in delirium, could shatter the fragile walls they'd built around that night. 35 years of silence, of pretending the child never existed, and yet her shadow lingered in Ellen's tearful glances, in Robert's sleepless nights. The door swung open and a woman stepped in, her presence commanding despite the chaos. Dr. Amara Coleman, her badge read, her white coat pristine against her deep brown skin. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned the monitors before settling on Robert. "Mr. Harper, I'm the cardiothoracic surgeon assigned to your wife's case," she said, her voice steady, laced with a warmth that cut through the room's chill. "We've stabilized her for now, but we need to discuss next steps." Robert nodded, but his throat tightened. Something about Amara, her poise, the curve of her jaw, stirred a memory he couldn't place. She moved with purpose, checking Ellen's chart, her fingers swift on the tablet. "Her condition is critical," Amara continued, her tone professional yet kind. "We're prepping for a temporary procedure to buy time, but a transplant is her best hope. Do you have any family history of heart issues we should know about?" The question landed like a stone. Robert's mouth went dry. "No, no history," he managed, avoiding her gaze. Amara's eyes lingered on him, a flicker of curiosity in their depths. but she didn't press. Instead, she turned to Ellen, gently touching her wrist. "We'll take care of you, Mrs. Harper," she murmured, as if speaking to more than just a patient. Ellen's eyes fluttered open, locking onto Amara's face. For a moment, time seemed to pause, the air thick with unspoken recognition. Robert's heart pounded. He saw it too, the ghost of another woman in Amara's features. It couldn't be. Not here, not now. He gripped the chair's armrest, his mind racing. Was it her, the child they'd let slip away? Amara stepped back, oblivious to the storm she'd ignited. "I'll check on her again soon," she said, offering Robert a reassuring nod before heading for the door. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway, each one pulling Robert deeper into dread. He looked at Ellen, whose eyes were still fixed on the space where Amara had stood, a single tear tracing her cheek. "Robert," she whispered, voice barely a breath. "It's her, isn't it?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. The past was no longer a memory. It was here, wearing a doctor's coat, holding their fate in her hands. Robert's fingers brushed the wedding band on his finger, the metal cold against his skin. Outside, Atlanta's lights pulsed, a city alive with secrets, and he wondered if theirs was about to unravel. The heart monitor beeped on, relentless, counting down to a truth they could no longer escape. Robert sat in the hospital's dimly lit waiting area, the coffee in his hand long gone cold. Ellen's whispered question, "It's her, isn't it?" echoed in his mind, each word a needle pricking the fragile seams of their silence. The sterile hum of the hospital surrounded him, but it couldn't drown out the past. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion and fear blurring the edges of his thoughts. Amara's face lingered, her features stirring, a ghost he'd tried to bury for 35 years. Could it really be her? The child they'd given away, now standing between Ellen and death? He shifted in the hard plastic chair, the weight of that rainy Georgia night pressing down. He saw Ellen's trembling hands as she signed the adoption papers, her sobs muffled by the storm outside. The baby's dark eyes had haunted him, so like Imani's, fierce, knowing, even in infancy. Imani, the love he'd lost to prejudice and cowardice. His family's ultimatum had been clear: end it or lose everything. He'd chosen the path of least resistance, convincing himself it was for Ellen, for their future. But the cost had been a piece of his soul. A muted announcement crackled over the intercom, pulling him back. He glanced at the clock, past midnight. Ellen was stable for now, Amar had said, her voice calm but piercing. That voice, that poise. It was Imani all over again. Robert's chest tightened. He needed air, needed to escape the hospital's suffocating grip. But first he had to face something he'd avoided for decades. He drove home through Atlanta's quiet streets, the city's glow a stark contrast to the turmoil within. Their modest house in the suburbs stood silent, its familiar creaks offering no comfort. Robert climbed the stairs to the attic, his steps heavy with purpose. Dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight as he knelt before an old cedar chest, its lock rusted from neglect. Inside, beneath faded photos and Ellen's wedding veil, lay a small envelope, yellowed with age. His fingers hesitated, then tore it open. Imani's handwriting stared back, elegant and deliberate. "Robert," the letter began, "if you're reading this, our daughter has found you. Don't let her grow in darkness. She's our light, yours and mine. Tell her I loved her, always." The words blurred as tears welled, each one a confession of his failure. Imani had written this before she died, hours after giving birth, knowing he'd betrayed her by letting their child go. She'd known he was the father, despite his lies to Ellen, to himself. The letter ended with a plea, "Be the man I believed you were." Robert sank to the floor, the letter trembling in his hands. 35 years ago, Imani had been his secret, a love forbidden by his family's rigid code. Ellen, his fiancée then, had agreed to carry the child to shield Imani from scandal, to protect Robert's name. But when Imani died, and the baby's skin revealed her heritage, Ellen's mother had drawn a line. No Harper will raise that child. Robert had stood by, silent as Ellen wept and signed the papers. He'd told himself it was for the baby's future, for a family that could give her what they couldn't. But Imani's letter exposed the truth. He'd chosen cowardice. The addict's chill seeped into his bones, but he barely noticed. Amara's face flashed in his mind, her eyes, Imani's eyes, searching his during their brief exchange. Did she know? Could she sense the truth in Ellen's tearful gaze? Robert folded the letter, slipping it into his pocket. He couldn't tell Ellen, not yet. Her heart was too weak, their guilt too raw. But the secret felt alive now, a pulse he couldn't silence. Back at the hospital, dawn's first light crept through the waiting room's windows. Robert found Amara at the nurse's station, her white coat slightly rumpled, a testament to her sleepless night. She looked up, her expression softening. "Mr. Harper, good timing. Your wife's procedure went well. She's awake, but she'll need rest before we discuss the transplant." "Thank you," Robert said, his voice hoarse. He studied her, searching for a sign, a hint of recognition, of accusation. But Amara's focus was on her tablet, her fingers tapping out notes. "Any family history we should know about?" she asked again, her tone casual but probing. "It could help with the transplant match." Robert's throat closed. "None," he lied, the letter burning in his pocket. Amara nodded, but her eyes lingered, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. She turned to leave, then paused. "She kept saying, 'I'm sorry,' in her sleep," Amara said, almost to herself. "Any idea why?" The question hung between them, sharp and heavy. Robert's heart raced, but he forced a shrug. "She's been through a lot." Amara gave a small nod, then walked away, her footsteps echoing in the sterile corridor. Robert watched her go, Amani's words ringing in his ears. "She's our light." He sank into a chair, the letter's weight pulling him under. Amara was no stranger. She was their daughter, the one they had abandoned to a world they feared. And now she held Ellen's life in her hands. He closed his eyes, seeing that rainy night again, the baby's cry fading as the social worker took her away. Ellen's sobs had filled the silence then, and now her whispered apologies haunted the present. Robert's fingers traced the letter's edges. The truth was coming, whether he was ready or not. And when it did, would Amara save them, or turn away, as they once had? Amara Coleman leaned over the lab's computer, the glow of the screen casting shadows across her face. The hospital's research wing was silent, save for the faint hum of machines, but her pulse raced as she studied Ellen Harper's genetic profile. A rare cardiac marker stared back, one she'd seen only once before, in her own DNA, from a study she'd volunteered for years ago. Coincidence, she told herself, but the word felt hollow. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. Something about Ellen's tearful gaze, about Robert's evasiveness, gnawed at her, like a melody she couldn't place. She straightened, rubbing her temples. The weight of last night's surgery lingered. Ellen's procedure had bought time, but the clock was ticking. Amara's job was to save her, not to chase ghosts. Yet as she glanced at the photo on her desk, her and Clara, her adoptive mother, laughing at a barbecue, her heart tugged. Clara had always been open about Amara's adoption, but the details were scarce. A closed process, a baby girl left with no name. Could Ellen and Robert know something? The thought felt absurd, yet it clung to her like damp Georgia air. Across the hospital, Robert stood by Ellen's bedside, the morning light filtering through the blinds. She looked fragile, her breathing steadier, but her eyes heavy with unspoken words. "You saw her, didn't you?" Ellen murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Amara, she's ours, Robert." Her hand reached for his, trembling. The heart monitor beeped softly, a metronome to their shared dread. "Ellen, don't," Robert said, his voice tight. "You need to rest." But his mind churned, Imani's letter a leaden weight in his pocket. Amara's question about Ellen's apologies had rattled him, her gaze too sharp, too searching. If he told the truth now, would she walk away, leaving Ellen to die? Or worse, would she hate them for what they'd done? 35 years ago, they'd chosen silence to survive a town that judged by skin. Now, that silence was a noose. "I can't keep lying," Ellen said, tears pooling. "She deserves to know, Robert, before it's too late." Her words cut deeper than he expected, stirring the shame he'd buried. He wanted to confess, to unburden his soul, but fear held him fast. Not yet, he pleaded. Let's get you stronger first. Ellen turned her face to the window, a silent rebuke, and Robert felt the chasm between them widen. In the lab, Amara's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. Dr. Nathan Brooks, her colleague, stood at the door, his usual grin replaced by a furrowed brow. You okay, Amara? You look like you've seen a ghost. She forced a smile, gesturing to the screen. Just digging into Mrs. Harper's case. Her heart's a puzzle. Nathan stepped closer, peering at the data. That marker's rare, he noted, then hesitated. You know, I was cross-referencing old records for the hospital's archive project. Found something weird. He pulled up a file on his tablet, his voice cautious. It's an adoption record from 35 years ago. A baby girl. Black, born here. Mother listed as Ellen Harper. Father, unknown. Amara's breath caught, the room tilting. Ellen Harper? She repeated, her voice barely audible. Nathan nodded, scrolling to the date. Matches your birthday, doesn't it? I mean, it's probably nothing, but... He trailed off, watching her closely. Amara stared at the screen, the words blurring. Her birthday, the hospital, Ellen's name. It was too much to be a coincidence. Her hand brushed the silver necklace Claire had given her, Imani's gift, as if it could anchor her. I need to see her, Amara said, standing abruptly. Nathan followed, concern etched on his face, but she barely noticed. The hospital corridors blurred as she moved, her mind a storm of questions. Was Ellen her mother? Why had they given her up? And Robert, his nervous glances, his vague answers, what was he hiding? She reached Ellen's room, pausing at the door. Through the glass, she saw Robert holding Ellen's hand, their heads bowed in quiet agony. Ellen's eyes met hers, and for a moment, time dissolved. There was no patient, no doctor, just a woman whose gaze held a lifetime of sorrow. Amara's resolve wavered, her anger mingling with a longing she couldn't name. Dr. Coleman, Robert said, startled as she entered. His voice was strained, his hand tightening around Ellen's. Amara nodded, her throat dry. I need to ask about your family history again, she said, her tone clipped. For the transplant. Anything you haven't told me? Her eyes locked on Robert's, searching for a crack in his facade. He shifted, glancing at Ellen. Nothing new, he said too quickly. Ellen's lips parted as if to speak, but a cough stole her breath. Amara adjusted the oxygen mask, her hands steady despite the tremor in her heart. Mrs. Harper, she said softly, you kept apologizing in your sleep. Why? Ellen's eyes widened, a tear escaping. I've made mistakes, she whispered, her voice breaking. Robert's face paled, his hand gripping the bedrail. Amara felt the air thicken, the truth hovering just out of reach. She stepped back, her mind racing. The adoption record, the genetic marker, Ellen's tears. They were pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. As she left the room, Nathan waited in the hall, his expression grave. You think it's her, don't you? He asked. Amara didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the hospital's windows. The necklace felt heavy against her chest, Imani's words a distant echo. If Ellen were her mother, what would that make Robert? And what had they done to cast her into the unknown? The answers were close, too close, and Amara wasn't sure she was ready to face them. Amara's question lingered in the hospital room like smoke, curling around Ellen's whispered admission of mistakes. The heart monitor's steady beep was the only sound, a fragile tether to the moment before everything unraveled. Robert stood frozen, his grip on the bedrail bruising his palm, as Ellen's tear-streaked face betrayed the secret they'd guarded for 35 years. Amara's gaze, sharp and unyielding, had pierced him, and now as she left, the door's soft click felt like a guillotine. Robert knew the truth was slipping from his grasp, and he was powerless to stop it. Ellen's hand trembled in his, her voice barely audible. We can't keep this from her, Robert, not anymore. Her eyes, clouded with pain but fierce with resolve, locked onto his. The dim light from the window cast her face in half shadow, a portrait of a woman haunted by choices made in fear. Robert's throat tightened, Imani's letter searing his pocket like a brand. He wanted to beg Ellen to wait, to let her heal before they faced the storm, but her words were a tide he couldn't hold back. Ellen, you're too weak, he said, his voice cracking. If we tell her now and she walks away, he couldn't finish. The thought of Amara abandoning Ellen's care, of losing her to the truth, was a weight he couldn't bear. But Ellen's gaze didn't waver. "She's our daughter," she whispered, each word a blade. "I carried her, Robert. I felt her move inside me. I won't die with this lie." Robert sank into the chair beside her, his hands covering his face. The hospital's antiseptic scent was suffocating, a reminder of how close death hovered. He saw Amara's face again, her eyes, Imani's eyes, searching his for answers he'd withheld. Ellen's insistence cracked something inside him, a dam he'd built with decades of denial. "There's more, Ellen," he said, his voice barely audible. "Something I never told you." Ellen's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around his. "What?" she asked, dread lacing the word. Robert's heart pounded, the letter's weight unbearable. He pulled it from his pocket, its edges worn from years of guilt, but didn't open it. He didn't need to. Imani's words were etched in his soul. "Amara isn't just Imani's," he said, forcing the words out. "She's mine. I'm her father." The room seemed to still, the monitors beep a distant echo. Ellen's eyes widened, shock giving way to a raw, aching betrayal. "Yours," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You and Imani." She trailed off, tears spilling as the truth reshaped their past. Robert nodded, shame flooding him. "It was before we married," he said, his voice hoarse. "I loved her, Ellen, but my family, they'd have disowned me. When Imani got pregnant, I begged you to carry her child, to hide it. I thought it would save us all." Ellen's hand slipped from his, her gaze drifting to the ceiling. "You let me believe it was just her child," she said, each word a wound. "I carried her, Robert. I loved her like my own, and you let me give her away." Her voice cracked, a sob escaping. "You knew, and you chose silence." Robert's chest ached, Imani's letter crumpling in his fist. "I was a coward," he admitted, tears burning his eyes. "I thought giving her up was the only way. My parents, the town, they'd have destroyed us. But when I saw Amara yesterday, I knew. She's ours, Ellen, and I've failed her every day since." Ellen's silence was worse than her tears. She turned her face away, her breathing shallow. Robert wanted to reach for her, to bridge the chasm he'd created, but the truth had carved too deep. "We have to tell her," Ellen said finally, her voice resolute despite its fragility. "She's saving my life, Robert. She deserves to know who she is." He nodded, though fear clawed at him. "But what if she hates us?" he asked, his voice small. "What if she leaves you to die?" Ellen's eyes met his, a flicker of strength beneath the pain. "Then we'll face it," she said. "But I won't let her live in the dark like Imani did." A knock interrupted, sharp and jarring. A nurse poked her head in. "Dr. Coleman's on her way back," she said, then vanished. Robert's pulse surged. Amara was coming, and the adoption record Nathan had found was a ticking bomb. He stuffed the letter back into his pocket, his hands shaking. "We'll tell her," he said, more to himself than Ellen. "But not today. You need to be stronger." Ellen's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. Her eyes drifted to the door, where Amara's silhouette appeared, her white coat a stark contrast to the hallway's gloom. "Mr. Harper," Amara said, her voice clipped as she entered. "I need to clarify something. Your wife's genetic profile, it's unusual. Any family history you're not sharing?" Robert's heart stopped. Her tone was professional, but her eyes burned with suspicion. He glanced at Ellen, whose tearful gaze pleaded for honesty. "Nothing," he lied, the word ash in his mouth. Amara's jaw tightened, her fingers pausing on her tablet. "Fine," she said, but the word carried a challenge. She turned to Ellen, softening. "Mrs. Harper, rest now. We'll talk soon." As Amara left, Robert heard her speaking to Nathan outside, her voice low but urgent. "That record, Nathan. Check the archives again. I need to know everything." Robert's knees buckled and he sank back into the chair. The truth was a freight train, and Amara was racing toward it. Imani's letter felt like a pulse against his chest, her plea echoing, "Be the man I believed you were." But as Ellen's hand reached for his, cold and fragile, Robert feared he'd never be that man. Not for Imani, not for Amara, not even for the woman he loved. Amara's footsteps echoed in the hospital corridor, each one a hammer striking the fragile wall she'd built around her heart. The adoption record burned in her mind. Ellen Harper listed as her birth mother, a truth she couldn't unsee. Her fingers brushed the silver necklace at her throat, a gift from a mother she'd never known, as she steeled herself for the confrontation. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, but it couldn't mask the storm brewing inside her. She pushed open Ellen's door, her resolve a blade honed by 35 years of unanswered questions. Ellen lay propped against pillows, her face pale but her eyes fierce with a mother's desperation. Robert stood beside her, his posture rigid, guilt etched in every line of his face. The heart monitor's beep was a relentless pulse, counting down to the moment their secret would shatter. Amara's voice cut through the silence, sharp and trembling. "You're my mother, aren't you? Ellen Harper, the woman who gave me away." Ellen's gasp was a soft, broken thing, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears spilled, carving paths down her cheeks. Robert stepped forward, his voice low. "Amara, please, let us explain." But Amara's glare silenced him, her eyes blazing with betrayal. "Explain," she snapped. "You left me, abandoned me like I was nothing. 35 years and now I'm supposed to save your life? Tell me why I shouldn't walk out that door." Ellen's sob filled the room, raw and wrenching. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We were young, scared. My family. They wouldn't let us keep you. Your skin, your heritage. They called it a disgrace." She reached out, her hand trembling, but Amara recoiled, the words a lash against her soul. "I carried you," Ellen continued, tears streaming. "I loved you, but I wasn't strong enough. I've regretted it every day." Robert's face crumpled, his hands clenching. "It's my fault," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm your father, Amara. Your real father." The confession hung heavy, a thunderclap in the sterile room. Amara's breath caught, her world tilting. "You?" she whispered, her eyes searching his, finding Imani's letter in his haunted gaze. "You loved my mother, and you still let me go?" "Imani was my everything," Robert said, tears falling. "But my family, they'd have destroyed us. I begged Ellen to carry you, to hide the truth. When Imani died, I couldn't face it. I chose cowardice, Amara. I chose wrong." His voice broke, and he sank into the chair, a man undone by his own shame. Ellen reached for him, her hands shaking, but her eyes stayed on Amara, pleading for a forgiveness she didn't dare hope for. Amara's chest heaved, anger and grief colliding. "You don't get to do this," she said, her voice rising. "You don't get to dump your guilt on me and expect me to fix it. I'm done here." She turned to leave, her hand on the door, but Ellen's voice stopped her, frail yet piercing. "Amara, wait. You deserve the truth, all of it. But you also deserve to know your mother, your real mother, loved you." The door opened before Amara could respond, and Clara Coleman stepped in, her presence a quiet anchor in the chaos. Her dark eyes, warm but steady, took in the scene, Amara's fury, Ellen's tears, Robert's defeat. "Amara," Clara said softly, "I got Nathan's call. You don't have to face this alone." Amara's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from her. Clara crossed the room, her voice gentle but firm. "I knew about them, sweetheart. Imani told me before she passed. I took you in to protect you, to give you the love they couldn't." Amara's hand tightened around the necklace, her lifeline. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice small. Clara's smile was tinged with sorrow. "You weren't ready, but Imani, she left something for you." From her purse, Clara drew a small velvet pouch and pressed it into Amara's hands. Inside was the necklace's twin, a silver pendant engraved with a single line, "You are their light." Amara's breath hitched, the words a whisper from a mother she'd never known. "Imani believed you'd find them," Clara said, her voice steady. "Not to hurt, but to heal. She saw strength in you, even then." Amara clutched the pendant, tears blurring her vision. The words were a bridge, spanning the chasm of her abandonment. She looked at Ellen, whose eyes mirrored her own pain, and Robert, broken by his confession. They were strangers, Yet they were her blood, her past. "I can't do this," Amara said, her voice trembling. "I can't be your doctor. Not now." She stepped back, the pendant warm against her palm. "I need time." Ellen nodded, her tears falling freely, while Robert's head bowed, his silence a heavy apology. Clara touched Amara's arm, guiding her toward the door. "You don't have to decide anything today," she said, "but you're not alone." As they stepped into the hallway, the hospital's hum enveloped them, a stark contrast to the storm within. Amara's fingers traced the pendant's inscription, Imani's words a quiet pulse in her heart. She glanced back at the room, where Ellen and Robert sat in their shared grief. They'd given her away, but they'd also given her life. Could she forgive them? Could she save them? The questions churned, unanswered, as Clara's arm steadied her. The necklace gleamed, a beacon in the dark, promising answers she wasn't ready to seek, but couldn't turn away from. Amara stood outside the operating room, the hospital's sterile hum a faint echo against the storm in her chest. The silver pendant from Imani hung heavy at her throat, its inscription, "You are their light," burning in her mind. Robert Harper's sudden collapse had thrust her back into the fray, his heart failing just hours after their wrenching confrontation. The call had come like a thunderbolt, emergency surgery, and she was the only surgeon available. Her hands, steady in countless operations, trembled now, not from doubt in her skill, but from the weight of who lay beyond the door. She closed her eyes, seeing Ellen's tearful plea, Robert's broken confession. They were her parents, the ones who'd cast her away. Yet here she was, poised to save him. "You don't owe them anything," she whispered to herself, but Imani's words tugged at her, a call to rise above the pain. The oath she'd sworn as a doctor pulsed in her veins, louder than her anger. She pushed through the doors, the operating room's harsh light swallowing her doubt. The team moved with practiced precision, monitors beeping, instruments gleaming. Robert lay on the table, his face ashen, a man stripped of defenses. Amara's mask hid her expression, but her eyes betrayed the war within, grief, betrayal, and a stubborn flicker of duty. "Let's begin," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the tension. The anesthesiologist nodded, and the scalpel gleamed in her hand, a cold extension of her will. As she worked, time blurred, the rhythm of surgery grounding her. Robert's heart, fragile and faltering, lay exposed, a map of his life's choices. She navigated its terrain, her hands deft despite the ache in her soul. A nurse handed her a sample for real-time analysis, standard for such a critical case. Amara barely glanced at the monitor, her focus on the delicate repair, until a soft chime drew her attention. The genetic scan flickered, revealing a marker so rare it stopped her breath. Her eyes widened behind the mask, the scalpel pausing for a heartbeat. The marker was identical to hers, a unique signature she'd found in her own DNA years ago. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was proof, undeniable, that Robert was her father. The room seemed to shrink, the beeping monitors fading as her vision tunneled. Tears stung, hot and unbidden, blurring the sterile field. She blinked them away, her hands resuming their work, but her heart raced with the truth. This man whose life she held was her blood, her betrayer, her father. "Dr. Coleman," the nurse's voice snapped her back, concern lacing the words. Amara nodded, her voice muffled but firm. "We're good. Keep the pressure steady." She pushed forward, stitching Robert's heart with a precision that belied the chaos within. Each suture was a choice, to save him, despite the pain he'd caused. Imani's pendant pulsed against her chest, a silent guide, urging her to be the light her mother saw. The surgery stretched on, hours folding into moments. Robert's heart stabilized, its rhythm strengthening under her hands. As she closed the final incision, the team exhaled, a collective release. Amara stepped back, her gloves stained, her body drained. "He's stable," she said, her voice flat, betraying none of the storm inside. The team dispersed, but she lingered, watching Robert's chest rise and fall, a fragile promise of life. In the surgeon's lounge, Amara sank onto a bench, the pendant clutched in her hand. The hospital's hum was distant, drowned by the echo of her discovery. Robert's DNA was hers, a bond she couldn't sever, no matter how much it hurt. She saw his face again, broken in confession, and Ellen's pleading for forgiveness. They'd abandoned her, yet she'd saved him. Was it duty or something deeper, a longing for the family she'd never had? The door opened, and Nathan Brooks stepped in, his eyes soft with worry. "You okay, Amara? That was intense." She managed a nod, her fingers tracing the pendant's inscription. "Why did you do it?" Nathan asked, sitting beside her. "After everything they told you, why save him?" Amara's gaze drifted to the ceiling, where fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. "It wasn't for them," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "It was for her, for Imani. She believed I could be more than their mistakes." She paused, the genetic marker flashing in her mind, a secret she wasn't ready to share. "And for me," she added, "I couldn't let him die, not when I had the chance to choose differently." Nathan's hand rested on her shoulder, a silent anchor. "You're stronger than anyone I know," he said. Amara's lips curved, a ghost of a smile, but her eyes were distant. The pendant warmed against her skin, Imani's faith a steady pulse. She thought of Clara, waiting somewhere in the hospital, and the love that had carried her through a life of questions. Could she find that love for Ellen and Robert, or was the wound too deep? As she stood, the lounge's quiet enveloped her, a brief respite before the next storm. Robert would live for now, but the truth of their bond was a weight she couldn't shed. She slipped the pendant beneath her scrubs, its message a quiet vow. The hospital corridor stretched before her, a path to answers she both craved and feared. Ellen's face, Robert's confession, Imani's hope. They wove a tapestry she couldn't unravel alone. But for the first time, Amara felt the strength to try, to face the light her mother had promised, even if it burned. Amara's fingers lingered on the pendant, Imani's words. "You are their light," a quiet anchor as she stepped into Ellen's hospital room. The air was heavy with unspoken truths, the heart monitor's soft beep a reminder of the fragile lives tethered to her choices. Ellen sat upright, her face pale but her eyes burning with a resolve Amara recognized, a mirror to her own. Robert, recovering in the next bed, looked gaunt, his gaze flickering between guilt and hope. Amara kept her distance, her heart still raw from the surgery, from the genetic marker that bound her to the man who'd abandoned her. Amara Coleman stood by the window, her presence a steady warmth in the tense room. She'd come at Amara's request, sensing her daughter needed more than medical expertise to navigate the storm. Amara's voice broke the silence, measured but edged with steel. "I saved him," she said, nodding toward Robert. "But I need answers. No more lies. Why did you really give me up?" Ellen's breath caught, her hands twisting the bedsheet. "We told you," she said, her voice trembling. "My family, they wouldn't accept you. I was weak, Amara. I carried you for Imani, but when she died..." Her words faltered, tears spilling. Robert reached for her hand, his own eyes glistening. "We thought you'd have a better life," he said, his voice hoarse. "A family that could give you what we couldn't." Amara's jaw tightened, the pendant warm against her chest. "That's not enough," she said, her voice rising. "You were my parents. You chose to walk away." The words hung sharp, cutting through the room's fragile calm. Clara stepped forward, her hand gentle on Amara's arm. "There's more to the story, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Something Imani wanted you to know, when the time was right." From her bag, Clara drew a small wooden box, its edges worn from years of care. She opened it, revealing a faded photograph and a letter sealed with wax. Amara's pulse quickened as Clara handed her the photo, a young woman, her smile radiant, standing beside another who shared her eyes. "This is Imani," Clara said, pointing to the first. "And this is Ellen. They were sisters, Amara, half-sisters, from the same mother, raised apart in a town that didn't forgive their differences." Amara's breath hitched, the photo trembling in her hands. Ellen's sob broke the silence, a raw, aching sound. "I didn't know," Ellen whispered, her voice shattering. "Not until I was pregnant with you. My mother, she hid it, said Imani's family was a shame we couldn't carry. When Imani asked me to carry you, I thought I was helping her, saving her from scandal. But when she died and I saw you, her voice cracked. You were so beautiful, Amara. But my mother, she made it clear. No Harper would raise a child like you. Robert's head bowed, his hands clenched. We were trapped, he said, his voice thick. I loved Imani, but my family, they'd have ruined us. I thought giving you up was mercy. I was wrong. Amara's eyes darted between them, the photo a weight in her hands. Ellen wasn't her mother. She was her aunt, bound by blood and secrets. The revelation reshaped her pain, layering it with a new, aching complexity. Clara opened the letter, her voice steady as she read. My dearest Amara, it began, Imani's handwriting elegant despite the faded ink. If you're reading this, you found Ellen and Robert. They loved you in their broken way. Forgive them, not for them, but for you. You are my light and theirs. Shine, always. Tears blurred Amara's vision, Imani's love a tangible force across the decades. The pendant at her throat seemed to pulse, a heartbeat tying her to a mother she'd never known. Imani knew, Clara said, her eyes soft. She knew Ellen was her sister, but she kept it quiet to protect you both. When she died, she entrusted you to me, hoping you'd find your way back. Amara's gaze fell to the photo, tracing the lines of Ellen's younger face, so like Imani's in its quiet strength. She saw it now, the shared curve of their jaws, the fire in their eyes. Ellen wasn't her mother, but she was family, torn apart by a world that feared their blood. Why didn't you tell me? Amara asked, her voice small, directed at Clara. Clara's smile was tinged with sorrow. You needed to find your own path, she said. Imani wanted you to choose forgiveness, not be forced into it. Amara's fingers closed around the photo, her heart a tangle of grief and dawning understanding. She looked at Ellen, whose tears mirrored her own, and Robert, whose silence spoke of a man drowning in regret. I don't know if I can forgive you, Amara said, her voice steady despite the ache. But I see her in you, Ellen. I see Imani. Ellen's hand reached out, trembling, and this time, Amara didn't pull away. Their fingers brushed, a fragile bridge across 35 years of loss. Robert watched, his eyes wet, a man clinging to a hope he didn't deserve. Clara stepped back, giving them space, her presence a quiet promise of support. The hospital room felt smaller, the walls holding their shared history, love, betrayal, and the slow mending of wounds. Amara slipped the letter into her pocket, Imani's words a guide for the path ahead. She didn't know what forgiveness looked like, but for the first time, she felt its possibility, like dawn breaking after a long night. The pendant gleamed, Imani's light urging her forward into a future where family might mean more than pain. The Georgia sun dipped low, casting golden streaks through the Harpers' living room as Amara stood at the threshold, the weight of Imani's pendant grounding her. Ellen's touch, fragile yet warm from their moment in the hospital, lingered in her memory, a bridge she hadn't yet crossed. A week had passed since she'd learned Ellen was her aunt, since Imani's letter had woven their fractured family into a tapestry of loss and love. Now at Ellen and Robert's invitation, she'd come to their home, Clara by her side, to hear the rest of their story, and to decide if forgiveness was a road she could walk. Ellen sat on a worn sofa, her hands clasped, the lines on her face softened by hope. Robert stood by the fireplace, his posture less burdened, though guilt still shadowed his eyes. The room smelled of cedar and old books, a quiet contrast to the hospital's sterile chill. Clara settled beside Amara, her steady presence a reminder of the love that had carried her through 35 years of questions. We're here, Amara said, her voice even but guarded. Say what you need to say. Ellen's breath hitched, her eyes glistening. We don't expect you to forgive us, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor. But we need you to know we never stopped loving you. She paused, glancing at Robert, who nodded, his jaw tight. After we gave you up, we tried to find you, Ellen continued. We wrote to agencies, searched records, but they were sealed. Every birthday, I'd light a candle, praying you were safe, happy. Robert stepped forward, his hands unsteady. I wrote to you, he said, pulling a leather-bound notebook from a shelf. He handed it to Amara, its pages yellowed, filled with letters never sent. Every year I'd write what I wished I could say, how I failed you, how I loved your mother, how I dreamed of being the father you deserved. His voice broke, tears tracing his cheeks. I was a coward, Amara, but I never forgot you. Amara's fingers traced the notebook's spine, her throat tight. The weight of their regret was palpable, a mirror to her own pain. She opened a page, reading Robert's scrawl. My daughter, you're 10 today. I hope you're laughing somewhere, free from our mistakes. Tears pricked her eyes, but she held them back, her heart caught between anger and a budding ache for what might have been. Clara's hand rested on her knee, a silent encouragement to listen, to feel. We're so sorry, Ellen said, her voice cracking as she knelt before Amara, a gesture of raw humility. We let fear steal you from us, but you're here now, and we'll do anything to make it right. Robert knelt beside her, his head bowed. Anything, he echoed, his voice a plea. The room held its breath, the air thick with the weight of their atonement. Amara's gaze softened, Imani's pendant warm against her chest. Their sincerity was undeniable, but forgiveness was a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. Then a spark ignited within her, a purpose born from her own journey. I've been building something, she said, her voice steady, surprising even herself. A foundation for children like me, abandoned, searching for their place. It's called Imani's Light. The words hung bright, a beacon in the dim room. I want you to help me, not for forgiveness, but to prove you mean it, to give others what you couldn't give me. Ellen's eyes widened, a sob catching in her throat. Imani's Light, she whispered, the name a prayer. Robert's face lit with a fragile hope, his hands trembling as he clasped them. We'll do it, he said, his voice firm. We'll give everything, time, money, whatever you need. Amara nodded, her heart lighter, though the wound remained. It wasn't absolution, but it was a start, a way to channel their guilt into something whole. Clara's smile was radiant, her hand squeezing Amara's. You've made her proud, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Imani always knew you'd find a way to heal. She reached into her bag, pulling out a delicate handkerchief, its edges embroidered with tiny roses. This was your grandmother's, she said, handing it to Amara. Imani and Ellen's mother. She'd want you to have it, to know you're part of them both. Amara's fingers brushed the fabric, the roses soft under her touch. She looked at Ellen, seeing Imani in the curve of her smile, the strength beneath her fragility. Thank you, she said, her voice quiet but sincere. She stood, the notebook and handkerchief in her hands, a bridge to a family she was only beginning to understand. I'll see you again, she said, meeting their eyes. But I need time. Ellen nodded, tears streaming, while Robert's gaze held a gratitude he couldn't voice. Clara guided Amara to the door, the Georgia dusk painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. As they stepped outside, Amara glanced back. The Harpers' silhouettes framed in the window, a tableau of remorse and redemption. She slipped the handkerchief into her pocket, Imani's pendant gleaming in the fading light. In the car, Amara stared at the notebook, Robert's words a lifeline across decades. The road stretched ahead, winding through the quiet suburbs, and she felt a shift within. A possibility, fragile but real. Clara's hand found hers, a silent vow of support. You're building something beautiful, Clara said, her voice warm, and they'll be part of it if you let them. Amara nodded, the weight of her past easing, just a fraction, as Imani's light guided her toward a future where family might mean more than pain. The Atlanta conference hall glowed with soft light, chandeliers casting a warm shimmer over the crowd gathered for the launch of Imani's Light. Amara stood at the podium, her heart a steady drumbeat as she looked out at the faces, donors, volunteers, and families touched by loss like hers. The pendant at her throat gleamed, Imani's words. You are their light, a quiet pulse guiding her. 3 months had passed since she'd stood in the Harpers' living room, offering them a chance to atone. Tonight that chance became real, and with it, a fragile hope for family. Ellen and Robert sat in the front row, their hands entwined, their faces alight with pride and quiet redemption. Clara was beside them, her smile a beacon of unwavering love. Amara's voice filled the room, clear and resonant. Imani's light is for every child left behind, she said, her words carrying the weight of her journey. For every heart searching for home, we're here to build futures, to heal wounds, because no one should grow up feeling unclaimed. The crowd applauded, but Amara's eyes lingered on Ellen, seeing Imani's strength in her aunt's tearful gaze. She stepped back, the applause a warm wave, and invited her family to join her. Ellen rose first, her steps tentative but sure, followed by Robert, whose recovery had left him steadier, his guilt softened by purpose. Clara moved with grace, her hand brushing Amara's arm as they stood together. "We're here because of Amara," Ellen said, her voice trembling but strong. "She turned our mistakes into hope. We're honored to stand with her, to make right what we broke." Robert nodded, his eyes wet. "She's our daughter," he said simply, the word a vow. The crowd's response was electric, but Amara's focus was on the moment. The four of them, bound by blood and choice, sharing a stage where pain had been transformed. She gestured to a screen behind them, where a photo appeared, a child, smiling, the first recipient of Imani's light's aid. "This is why we're here," Amara said, her voice thick. "For them and for us." She glanced at Ellen and Robert, her heart softening. "For family, however it's found." Clara stepped forward, her voice warm. "Amara's mother, Imani, believed in light," she said, holding up the embroidered handkerchief, its roses catching the light. "This belonged to her mother, Amara's grandmother, who loved two daughters through a world that tried to tear them apart. Tonight, we honor that love." She handed the handkerchief to Amara, who clutched it, tears brimming. The pendant at her throat seemed to hum, Imani's presence woven into every word. The ceremony ended, and the crowd milled, their chatter a soft hum. Amara stepped off the stage, Ellen and Robert at her side, their presence a quiet comfort. "You were incredible," Ellen said, her voice breaking. "Imani would be so proud." Amara smiled, the ache of their past easing. "You're part of this now," she said, meeting their eyes. "Thank you for showing up." Robert's hand found hers, a brief, trembling clasp. "We'll keep showing up," he promised, his voice raw. Clara joined them, her arm around Amara. "You've built something beautiful," she said, her eyes shining. They moved toward a table where a photographer waited to capture their first family photo. As they posed, Ellen and Robert on one side, Clara on the other, Amara at the center, the weight of 35 years seemed to lift. The camera flashed, freezing their smiles, their linked hands, a moment of wholeness Amara had never dared dream. "Family," she whispered, the word a revelation, and Ellen's tearful nod echoed her heart. As the crowd thinned, a young woman approached, her steps hesitant but purposeful. She was in her early 20s, her dark eyes wide with a mix of nerves and hope. "Dr. Coleman," she said, her voice soft, "I'm Maya. I think I'm your cousin." Amara froze, the handkerchief slipping in her hand. The crowd's hum faded, the world narrowing to this stranger's face, so like Imani's, like Ellen's, like her own. "Maya," Amara repeated, her voice catching. The young woman nodded, pulling a worn photo from her pocket, a duplicate of the one Clara had shown, Imani and Ellen's mother. "My mom was Imani's cousin," Maya said, tears glistening. "She raised me after I lost my parents. I found you through the foundation, through Imani's light." Amara's breath hitched, her hand reaching for Maya's, their fingers locking in a rush of recognition. Ellen gasped, stepping closer, her eyes tracing Maya's features. "You're hers," she whispered, tears falling. Robert's hand steadied her, his own eyes wet with wonder. Clara smiled, her arm around Amara. "Imani's family keeps growing," she said, her voice warm. Amara pulled Maya into an embrace, the pendant pressing between them, a heartbeat of connection. "You're home," she whispered, and Maya's sob was a quiet affirmation. The hall's lights dimmed, the event drawing to a close, but Amara lingered with her family, Ellen, Robert, Clara, and now Maya. The photo from the stage glowed on a nearby screen, their first family frame, a testament to love's resilience. Amara touched the pendant, Imani's light a steady guide. The road ahead was uncertain, but Maya's arrival was a promise of new chapters, new bonds. As they stepped into the Atlanta night, Hands linked, Amara knew this was only the beginning. A family forged not just by blood, but by the choice to heal, to shine, to love. Amara's journey wove a family from the ashes of regret, proving love can mend even the deepest wounds. Through Imani's light, they found redemption, a testament to forgiveness and fate's gentle hand. What did their story stir in you? Share your thoughts below. Where are you listening from? And how did their reunion touch your heart? A huge thank you for joining us on this emotional ride. If Amara's courage moved you, please like, subscribe, and share our channel to spread her light. Stay with us for more stories that heal and inspire. Until next time, keep shining.